You're not here by accident. Something deep within you led you to this video at precisely this moment, and when you finish watching it, you'll understand why. There are times in life when we feel small, insignificant, as if our role in this vast world is limited or invisible. And yet, there are also moments, unexpected, unexplainable, when life begins to reveal something far greater. You begin to sense that your presence, your existence, has been fulfilling a purpose far deeper than what you ever imagined. It's not about ego. It's something that emerges from the soul. Carl Jung once said that true self-realization begins when a person aligns with a purpose greater than themselves. And whether or not you can describe it, you're beginning to live that process. You may not fully understand what's happening yet, but something inside you already knows. Let's start with this. People open up to you as if they've known you for a long time. Strangers, friends, even those who barely speak to others, they come to you and suddenly begin to share things they've carried for years in silence. You don't ask for it, you don't chase it, but it happens. And they don't come to you because of your academic knowledge or because of something you've achieved on the outside. They come because of the way you make them feel. Your presence has a way of making people feel seen, heard, understood. Sometimes you don't even need to say a word. Your simple presence is enough. And in that presence, something shifts. They relax. They breathe easier. They let go. The tension they carried melts, and they don't always know why, but you do. Because you felt this happen again and again. And instead of feeling overwhelmed, you feel a strange and peaceful calm, as if you've always known what others need, even before they do. This isn't because you have all the answers. It's because you hold space for the answers to emerge naturally. That ability of yours didn't come from books or training. It came from something much deeper. You've been cultivating a certain kind of energy without even realizing it. A vibration. One that doesn't lead from above, but from beside. It doesn't instruct. It allows. You never announced yourself as a healer. You never said, "I'm here to help." But life knows. The souls around you recognize it, even if they don't understand it. You're not playing a higher role in the traditional sense. You're fulfilling something sacred. You're learning how to accompany others without taking control, to understand without judgment, to hold space without directing. And that is rare. The way others open up to you is not a coincidence. It's a reflection of something deeper inside of you. Your soul has begun to emit a frequency that others feel even if they can't explain it. It's as if, somewhere beyond the physical, you carry a message written into your being. It doesn't need to be spoken, but others feel it. They recognize it. They feel like they've come home. It's not what you say, it's what you radiate. You don't go around announcing this, because even you don't fully understand how it works. You just know that when someone is with you, they soften, they surrender, they start to breathe in a new way. They speak of things they hadn't even admitted to themselves. And instead of feeling burdened, you stay. You remain grounded, honest, still. You don't rush to fix them. You don't try to give them answers. You just hold space. A space that feels safe, real, clear. And that kind of presence is rare. It reveals that you are serving a much higher function than you ever believed. You start to realize something important. You don't need to have a perfect life in order to support others. You don't need to have all the answers to guide someone. You don't need to be in control to inspire trust. What you're doing isn't helping in the traditional sense. You're reminding people of who they are, simply by not forgetting who you are. You've stopped filling silences with noise. And in that silence, you've started to carry emotional processes that others couldn't hold on their own. Not because you're stronger, but because you're clearer. That inner clarity you've cultivated has become a shelter for those still lost in confusion. Carl Jung spoke of archetypes that move beyond personality, living forces that work through us when we align with something larger than ourselves. You've begun to embody one of those forces, a presence that doesn't need a name, a role that isn't defined by society. You are support without structure. You are comfort without credentials. You are space without a script. And that is one of the most sacred roles a soul can fulfill. To simply be the place where another human being can finally let go of what they've been holding in silence. To be the presence where there is no judgment, no correction, no evaluation, just being. And in that presence, something extraordinary happens. They return to themselves, not because of what you said or what you did, but because you were there, fully, genuinely, just being, signaled to. There comes a moment in your journey when you begin to realize something remarkable, that many of the decisions you once believed were impulsive or irrational were in truth directed by a force far greater than your own logic. You look back and notice how certain steps you took, ones that seemed reckless or inexplicable at the time, were in fact divinely aligned. Moments of departure you couldn't explain, choices that defied common sense, changes that seemed devoid of reason, all of them now, through the lens of your soul, begin to make perfect sense. Because now you see the map, the one you couldn't see before. Every move, no matter how uncertain or painful, placed you exactly where you needed to be. And it wasn't your conscious mind that orchestrated it. You didn't design this plan with spreadsheets or goals. It was your frequency, your vibration, responding to an invisible signal, a pull that had no blueprint, no guarantees, no promises, just direction. And you followed it, often unknowingly, but always faithfully. Carl Jung spoke of the self, that higher part of us that guides our life's deepest movements, often beyond the grasp of our ego. And now, you're beginning to distinguish the subtle yet powerful difference between when it was your ego making the decisions and when it was your soul leading the way. With this awareness comes a profound realization. You're not here by coincidence. You didn't become who you are by accident. You've walked through the fire. You've endured loss, heartbreak, disconnection, not as random events, but as sacred initiations. Every fracture you experienced, every empty space you learned to sit in, every unexpected change was constructing something within you. A vast, silent space inside that has become your greatest strength. What once felt like breaking was actually shaping. What once felt like abandonment was actually a return to yourself. You no longer see your hardships as failures. You see them as preparation, as quiet, divine training. You no longer ask, "Why me?" Because now you understand. It had to be you. Your energy had to learn how to stand alone, how to hold its own, so that one day you could hold space for others, not from a place of martyrdom, but from a place of conscious presence. Everything that once appeared to be chaos now reveals itself as part of a divine order. It's as if life was secretly preparing you, guiding you toward a higher role, one far beyond what your rational mind could conceive. A role that requires no certificates, no applause, only the courage to survive yourself, to go deep within and meet the truth of who you are without distraction. And the recognition that comes with this, it's not one of pride, it's one of humility. Because you know, this was never your plan. Your mind didn't lead the way. You were led. You were emptied of what you thought you needed, so you could carry only what was essential. You had to become light enough to hold the weight of your own truth. And now you understand why you had to let go of so much, why you had to be broken open. You now see that the places where it hurt the most were the ones that taught you how to hold yourself from within. The connections that fell apart taught you not to cling. The sacrifices you made without knowing why were acts of deep, invisible loyalty to a purpose that hadn't yet been revealed. And now, when someone asks how you made it through, you don't have a straight answer, because you didn't know you were making it through. You just followed something inside you that refused to settle, even when you couldn't name it. Now, with the clarity of this new consciousness, you realize that all of it, the confusion, the pain, the solitude, was part of a divine design you couldn't perceive at the time. But from where you stand now, you see the delicate threads. The map was always there, just invisible, woven by a force that is not yours to control, but also not yours to doubt. You don't need to understand it fully, you can feel its truth. Carl Jung once said, "What is not made conscious will be lived as fate." And now, you're making that fate conscious. You're realizing that your role was never small. It was simply waiting for you to be quiet enough inside to hear it. And this awareness that's blooming within you doesn't need outside approval. You no longer seek validation or recognition. You no longer crave understanding. You've learned to trust the feeling inside that says, "This is right," even if no one else understands it. That certainty doesn't come from reason. It comes from resonance, from the vibration you've refined through every storm, every loss, every silent night when you rebuilt yourself without a script, without applause, without witnesses. While the world around you crumbled, something deeper was forming, something that today you recognize not as an achievement, but as a sacred responsibility. You no longer see yourself as someone just trying to make sense of life. You now know you're here to hold a frequency that not everyone can hold. Not because you're better, but because you refuse to shut down when it would have been easier to harden. You chose to feel when numbing would have been safer, and that invisible choice made all the difference. That's what made you a vessel, a channel, a mirror, a grounding presence. You've started to notice that when you're present, things align around you. Not because you're forcing anything, but because your energy carries coherence. When you speak, it's not the voice of someone who knows. It's the voice of someone who remembers. And people can feel it. They may not know what it is, but they feel the shift. They feel the invitation to return to themselves. Jung also said that when the soul aligns with its deepest center, it begins to operate from a place the mind cannot dominate. And you've arrived there. That place where your energy does more than your words, where your story becomes medicine, even if it's never told, where your mere presence reorders the room, uplifts others, transmits a truth that needs no explanation. You don't advertise it, you don't label it, but you know. You know it without knowing how. You know it because you feel it, because you see it reflected in the eyes of those who come near, those who cry in your presence without understanding why. That is the role you're now fulfilling. Not one measured by status or metrics, but by the authenticity with which you occupy your inner space. And you are occupying it now like never before. No masks, no fragments, no decoration. Just you, as a pure channel, for something far greater than yourself, something that chose to move through you. And in allowing that force to pass through you, you've come to understand the true essence of service. It's not about doing more, it's about being more. Being a clear space where the purest part of you can touch others without interference, without expectation, without the need for praise or outcome, simply holding the vibration you've earned through all your inner work, the work no one saw, but everyone now feels. You didn't ask to hold this higher role. Life handed it to you. Life trusted you with it through experiences you didn't know you could survive, but you did. And while surviving, you were aligning, quietly, steadily, unshakably. Now, you no longer doubt your intuition. When your body tells you something isn't right, you listen. You no longer force connections where your energy doesn't flow. You've stopped explaining your sensitivity to those who label it strange. You've remembered that what you are doesn't need justification. It needs integrity. And integrity has become your way of being. Not because you're trying, but because you simply can't live any other way without betraying yourself. As Jung said, the soul falls ill when it disconnects from its center. And you have chosen to stay in yours, even if that meant walking away from familiarity, dismantling internal structures, and walking alone through long stretches of the path. But now you see that solitude was preparation. That emptiness was expansion. That silence was a language. And now, from that language, you speak, even without words. You heal, even without touch. You inspire, even without trying. You don't call it a mission. You don't name it purpose. You simply live it, like breath, like stillness, like someone who is exactly where they need to be, because there is nowhere else they could be. And if you ever doubted your importance, your impact, your place in the vast, invisible fabric of the collective soul, now you begin to feel it. You don't need to be seen from above to be fulfilling a high role. You just need to be where truth isn't compromised, where energy isn't masked, where your presence doesn't perform. It simply transforms. Because sometimes the highest role is not the most visible one. It's the most coherent. And you are already there. Signal 3. Your sensitivity is no longer just a trait. It has become your most accurate compass. You've noticed that you perceive before you understand, that you feel before you define, that something within you picks up the vibration of things, of spaces, of people, even before anything visible happens. And the most surprising part? You no longer question it. You no longer need anyone else to validate your perception, because you've learned to trust that sensitivity as an essential part of the higher role you're beginning to fulfill. You no longer see your sensitivity as a weakness. Now you know it's deep perception. It's a language that comes before words. It's a direct connection to what others cannot register. And that connection is a form of guidance. Carl Jung said that those who haven't explored their own depths can hardly accompany another into theirs. And you've descended into your own depths many times. You've walked through emotional landscapes that most avoid. You've inhabited nameless voids. You've withstood storms without anyone knowing. That's why now, when someone shatters in front of you, you're not afraid, because you recognize that place, because you've been there. And since you've journeyed through it, you can accompany others without judgment. Since you've felt it, you can hold space without intruding. Your sensitivity allows you to read between the lines, to perceive what isn't being said, to detect the emotional tone of a room before a single word is spoken. And you do it effortlessly, not because you learned it, but because it's your natural way of being. And this way of being, quiet, respectful, profound, is part of the higher role you now embody. It's a guidance that needs no words, a presence that seeks no validation. You're beginning to understand that your sensitivity doesn't separate you, it connects you. It doesn't make you weaker, it makes you more precise. And in a world where so much is masked, someone who feels without self-deception is medicine. That sensitivity you once tried to hide, to minimize, or to explain away has now become your most sacred treasure. Because you've realized not everyone can hold what you feel, but you can hold what others aren't yet ready to face. And you don't do it from logic. You do it from a vibration that's become so precise that even the slightest misalignment in someone else's energy field, you already sensed it. It's an internal pulse, a silent alert, a certainty that doesn't pass through the mind. And that certainty isn't invasive. It doesn't make you interfere. It makes you dwell with greater awareness. You've learned that feeling isn't the same as carrying, that perceiving doesn't mean solving, and that your sensitivity doesn't demand constant action, only that you stay present in a clearer, cleaner, more honest way. Now, you know that what you feel is real. You don't need external proof to validate your perception. Because when something doesn't resonate with you, even if everything on the outside seems perfect, you know it. And when something does resonate, it doesn't matter if it lacks form. You recognize it. Carl Jung said, "The soul knows what it needs long before reason understands it." And you've started living from that knowing. That's why your sensitivity now guides your decisions. It tells you which bonds to open, which spaces to close, which paths to walk, and which energies to avoid, without guilt, without justification, without explanation. You no longer ask permission to protect your energy. You no longer force your presence where your soul shrinks. You no longer give your attention to what doesn't honor you vibrationally. And that, even if invisible, is a form of leadership. Because leadership isn't always about speaking loudly. Sometimes it's about standing firm in subtlety, staying whole in the unseen. And you've learned to turn that subtlety into a channel, a compass, a medicine, a vibrational act of love. Now you know that feeling is your language, and that your way of feeling so deeply, so precisely, is part of what you came here to offer. Not with effort, not with noise, only with truth. Signal 4. You've started to notice that you don't fit into any fixed structure because your energy came to support a space that didn't exist before. You're not the typical leader, nor the traditional guide. You don't follow the expected paths, nor do you speak the way people are supposed to. And while for a long time, that made you feel out of place, now you're starting to understand. You're not here to fit in. You're here to open a new space. Your presence doesn't replicate templates. The way you support, accompany, and live is unique. And every time you tried to force yourself to follow a script, something inside you cracked a little. Because you didn't come to repeat. You came to embody something different. You felt it in groups, in systems, in environments where everyone operated from a learned pattern, and you simply couldn't. Not because you didn't know how, but because your soul no longer cooperates with what's fake, forced, or copied. You don't shape yourself to appear. You shape yourself to resonate. And even if that's not always understood from the outside, it's a clear sign you're fulfilling a role that transcends formats. You are a living frequency that can't be confined to labels. You've learned to step away from places where belonging meant abandoning parts of yourself. Now, you choose solitude over inner division. And in that gesture, which may look simple from the outside, lies deep meaning. Because by not forcing yourself into any structure, you've begun to create your own, to hold space that didn't exist until you inhabited it with your truth. And because of that, others are beginning to arrive, not because you call them, but because they feel in you a different way of being, one that doesn't impose, doesn't demand, doesn't judge. They know there's something real in your way, and even if they don't fully understand it, they recognize it. This new space you're holding, even without a name or form, is already doing its work, without campaigns, without plans, without needing explanation. It's your way of being in the world, with silent coherence that's creating change. Not the visible kind, not the kind that's immediate or celebrated, but the kind that moves subtly through the soul of those who watch you in silence, who breathe with you, who dare to feel your presence. Because you don't teach with words, you teach through how you are, through how you choose, through the way you protect your energy, not as defense, but as integrity, through the way you say no without hurting, through the way you choose calm, even if it distances you from everything that feels urgent. And in that quiet, firm, unique style, you're showing that there is another way, one that isn't written, but deeply felt, one that isn't learned, but remembered. For years, you felt like you didn't belong, that there was no place aligned with how you see, feel, or hold things. Now you understand. That was part of the design, because you didn't come to adapt. You came to embody something that didn't yet have form. And little by little, you've begun to shape that form through your truth, not with violence, not through imposition, but with presence. A presence that doesn't need a stage to have an impact. A presence that, without intending to, begins to resonate in others who also felt out of place. And in seeing you, in feeling you, they realize there are more like them. Your life, lived from your center, is already a message. Your coherence is structure. Your vibration is the space. And that thing that once seemed formless, that oddness you thought set you apart, is what now makes you a channel for something new. And you don't need to call anyone, because those who are meant to arrive will find their way to that space only you knew how to hold, even if you didn't know you were holding it. And the most profound part of all this is, you never had to explain it for it to work. Your field was already speaking, before you even realized you were communicating. The way you withdrew with love was already a form of teaching. Your ability to say, "This is as far as I go," without bitterness, was a lesson for someone who never knew how to set boundaries. Your silence was a mirror, your way of being, a seed, your presence, a shelter. You've discovered that the thing that made you feel invisible was actually the reason you were chosen, to hold something that few can. Because only those who've lived on the margins can hold the center with humility. Only those who've been misunderstood can accompany without judgment. Only those who've been pushed aside can look at others without pretense. Now, all the things that once didn't seem to fit have become your medicine. The way you read a space before anything happens. The way your body closes without rational reason. The way you just know when to leave, when to stay, when to open up. That thing that seems strange is your vibrational precision. It's your unspoken mastery. And now you're starting to understand that you don't have to do something big to fulfill a high role. You have to be something deep. You have to be you, in your most refined, honest, sensitive form. And that part of you no one sees from the outside is holding changes others don't even know they need. You used to think you were invisible, but what you really are is irreplaceable, not because your ego needs it, but because your soul knows it. You've started to see how, without trying, your way of being has begun to shape others, not by imposing your truth, but by inhabiting it. That thing you do effortlessly, when you choose to stay with yourself, when you maintain your coherence, even if you're alone, when you don't sugarcoat your feelings just to make them digestible. That's what transforms the most. Because now you know you're fulfilling a higher role, not by what you do, but by what you hold. And what you hold is felt. Sign 5. You begin to notice something subtle but powerful. You no longer need approval to know you're on the right path. For a long time, you looked outside yourself for answers. You searched for signs, for validation, for someone, anyone, to tell you that you were doing well. You wanted a gesture, a nod, a word of reassurance. You craved confirmation that your steps were taking you in the right direction. But something has shifted. You no longer wait for applause. You're no longer hoping to be understood. You've stopped trying to explain yourself to the world. Because now your certainty doesn't come from the outside. It rises from within. It comes from a silent, steady, and unshakable place inside of you. A deep sense that even if no one sees it, even if no one acknowledges it, you are exactly where you are meant to be. And that realization doesn't make you arrogant. It makes you free. Free to move without permission. Free to be without needing translation. Free to hold your truth, even when no one else shares it. You've stopped doing things to please others. You've stopped speaking to convince. You've stopped proving your worth through demonstrations and accomplishments. Now, you act because it feels right. You speak because something within you needs expression. You stay because your energy sustains it. And in this way of being, so pure, so clean, so effortless, you begin to see clearly. What you came here to do doesn't need to be noticed to be real, because the deepest impact is not always measured in applause or reactions. It is measured in transformation. And you no longer measure yourself by what you accomplish. You measure yourself by what you are able to hold without losing yourself. You used to look for signs so you could trust. Now, you trust, and the signs appear. This is one of the clearest marks that you are fulfilling a higher role than you ever imagined. You don't need anyone to confirm it anymore, because now you know, you feel it, you are it, and this certainty that now lives inside you is not mental noise. It's not a learned affirmation. It's not something someone else told you. It's calm. It's that quiet sensation that appears when there's nothing left to prove, when your energy walks ahead of you, unapologetically, without justification. That's when you realize your path no longer needs to be explained. The way you live, the way you feel, the way you choose, even if it doesn't fit into conventional logic, is profoundly aligned with what your soul came here to sustain. And that kind of alignment is no longer up for debate. It's sacred. It's honored. You no longer need immediate results to feel confident. Now you know that everything you do, even if it doesn't create an echo in the external world, leaves a vibration, a silent imprint, a shift in the field, a quiet presence that reorganizes the space it touches, even if the world doesn't see it, even if there's no recognition. You've stopped chasing validation because you've remembered something crucial. Your guidance doesn't come from outside. It comes from how you inhabit yourself when no one is watching. It comes from the clarity with which you make decisions that no one else understands, but that you know deeply are part of something greater, something bigger than you, something you can't quite see yet, but you can feel with every cell in your body. And that loyalty to the invisible, that fierce fidelity to what's not yet manifest, is what carries you now. You don't need others to agree. You don't have to convince anyone. You no longer dim your light to make others comfortable. Because now you understand that when you walk from your truth, not everyone will be able to walk with you, but the path itself will align. And that, though it may seem intangible, is a form of leadership. A leadership that does not need a throne, or a spotlight, or an audience. It's the kind of leadership that operates from the soul, from vibration, from the silence that brings order. You made a decision to no longer betray yourself, and from that moment on, every one of your choices became an act of service. Every silence you keep is a sacred act. Every time you step back, it's a way to protect what is still growing. You've stopped moving forward for validation. Now you move forward out of coherence, out of alignment, and that has changed everything inside you. You no longer walk to be seen. Walking for you is enough, because now you understand that your true role is not something that needs to be named. It's something that is felt. It's something that is lived. You are already vibrating in that space. You don't need to know exactly what you're doing anymore, because your whole being already knows. And once you feel that knowing, you can't unfeel it. You're not who you once were, and you no longer need to become someone else. You are exactly where you're meant to be, embodying a higher role than your mind ever imagined, but one your soul always recognized. Your way of seeing, of choosing, of holding space, of withdrawing, of feeling. That is the message. That is the medicine. That is the path. A path others didn't even know existed until you made it inhabitable. And for that, for allowing yourself to recognize it, thank you. Thank you for staying true to yourself, especially in those moments when it would have been easier to betray your own essence. Thank you for holding on to the vibration of what's real, even when it had no name, even when no one else seemed to notice. If this message resonated with you, if something deep within you was ignited without needing words, I invite you to subscribe. I invite you to keep showing up in this space, a space where consciousness sees itself clearly, without masks, without filters. And don't forget to activate the notification bell so you don't miss the next moment of truth that might just change everything.